Hello, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues from the Institute of Race Relations, Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you?
Good, man. I just got a new air filter, so I'm feeling fresh.
Very good. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see that Gabriel's sitting in a fairly grand setting, so I think he looks very wise, like a guru there. And Mr. Marius Roodt, who is currently battling construction noise from his neighbor. Marius, how are you?
I'm right in you, Nick. It seems to be quiet at the moment, but I'm sure it'll probably start again at some point.
I'm sure, the moment we start recording, it's what happens.
No, but at least it shows that some parts of the economy are working. So the wall building industry in Edenvale seems to be booming.
It's the silver lining.
Yeah, exactly.
In the gloomy, stuffy weather.
I think he just didn't want me looking into his backyard anymore, so that's probably why he's doing
it. I wouldn't either, dodgy fellow, Marius. Anyway, let us dive right into it with a piece of news that Marius brought to our attention, which is about business confidence in South Africa. And, well, the numbers are quite something. Marius, tell us what exactly is going on with business confidence in South Africa.
So the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, every year every month actually, they release an index of business confidence, and they look at things like retail sales, vehicle sales, share prices, the exchange rate, and all that kind of stuff. And then they give us an average for each year. And this index started in 1985. Last year was the lowest it's ever been. It uses 2015 as a base set. And for 2020, the index was only 86.5. That is the lowest it's ever been. The second lowest was 1985 when the index began, when South Africa was in the grip of basically what was an internal insurrection against apartheid. I mean, there were economic sanctions from basically every economy in the world against South Africa, and business confidence was high in 1985 in 2020. And then the third lowest year ever was 2019. So it tells you it's a bit of a trend. Out of this index's history, which is about 35 years, two of the lowest years ever have been the last 2 years. So it's something to be quite concerned about. And the index, the SACCI, they released a statement, and they didn't really pull any punches. They spoke about steeply rising unemployment and unsustainable fiscal position, which we all know about. And they said the only way out of this predicament, which we're probably all going to agree with, is to enhance private sector fixed investment, provide credible economic policy that improves confidence in economic growth prospects, and reduce the role of the state to lessen borrowing levels and public debt servicing costs. So I think everybody is pretty much agreed about what South Africa has to do to get out of this, economic mess we find ourselves in. But it seems there's very little political will from anyone. Even Tito Mboweni was kind of seen as a reformer, but as time goes on and he tweets more, it seems to become pretty clear he's not really a reformer. And there is no real such thing as a reformist ANC. There's probably just an ANC that supports Zuma and an ANC that doesn't really. There's no reform ANC. So, yeah, I mean, and I don't think anybody's surprised by this news that it's these very low business confidence levels. So, yeah, it's something to be concerned about. The one tiny silver lining is that the lowest monthly level was in May last year when it was only 70. And it's been increasing since then, but that's obviously because of the lockdown, all kinds of things, or the lockdown being lifted, not really because of any real reforms in the economy or from the government. So I think it's something to be quite concerned about, and I think lots of organizations, not just ourselves, have been raising, alarm bells and so on. I mean, just last week, Moody's also said they're probably going to have to downgrade South Africa again because there's no indication that we're doing anything to halt this fiscal slide. So, I mean, it's pretty inevitable we're probably going to get downgraded again, and all the economic cost of that.
I want to say two things. The first one is Twitter is very good at dashing anyone's illusions of heroes. If you think that someone is wise, kind, great, clever, whatever, if you follow them on Twitter, most of the time, but not all of the time, you're probably going to find that they're maybe not quite what you thought they were. And Tito Mboweni's tweets yesterday, he's decided to go on about how he believes that not the majority of whites are not endorsing the non-racial project of South Africa and still see black people as servants. which is a whole nother issue. But anyway, and my question to you, Gabriel, and also you can comment on what Tito said. Is 2021 going to be worse in terms of business confidence than 2020?
I mean, that's going to be almost impossible, but we're going to do our damnedest, it seems, in South Africa. One of the things I'd like to sort of reflect back a little bit on what this long-term 35-term index tells us. One thing it tells us is that the ANC of yesteryear is not the same as the ANC today. Business confidence was higher in the 90s and in the 2000s. This is very important to remember. Some people who like us, take the view that reform is no longer possible within the ANC, then take from that the line that the ANC has always been terrible. This is just not borne out by the facts. Nelson Mandela, there's a wonderful story by Alistair Sparks, late great editor, chief editor of the Rand Daily Mail, real thorn in the side of the apartheid regime, and good at reporting on the brutality of the People's War as well, and so critical of the ANC in that regard. He met Nelson Mandela. He gave the first interview that any journalist did after Mandela came out of prison. And a few days later, got a phone call from Mandela saying, hey, you gave such a nice interview with me. You wrote such a nice piece about me, but I see you've been criticizing my or ANC ideas about nationalizing the mines, nationalizing the banks, and so on. Why are you being so critical? And he said, well, I'm happy to tell you. And Mandela said, well, then let's have a tea. And they had a discussion. And Sparks made the argument and then said, if you don't trust me, go into third world countries that have done this and see what they say now. You take on the risks and you have basically no benefit. It's a very bad idea. And they did that. And then Mandela gave his famous Davos speech where he sort of turned his back on this idea that the state has to be the organ of all growth. Thabo Mbeki, very much the same. Trevor Manuel, very much the same. This government taxed, it ran a budget surplus. It was saving money in the 2000s. We were running at 5% GDP growth. Business confidence was very high. So there was an ANC that knew how to do the thing. That ANC is gone. You can tell by the key players that are all gone. You can tell by the performance in 2019. I think that's the most standout fact. You can't blame this all on COVID because in 2019, we had the lowest business confidence since 1985. And I think that's important to answer your question, Nick, about what we should expect in 2021 and going forward. In order to solve a problem, I have the old-fashioned idea that you have to identify the problem. Now, not everyone agrees. But for those who do agree,
sounds a bit radical, that idea.
For those who do agree, it's a very, very disturbing situation to look at. The identity of the problem is not the color of anyone's skin. It's the nature of our accounting books. It's not sort of which God you pray to. It's how many people are stealing money and are still in power. It's not some idea about accents or style. It's a very, very concrete idea about how many people, especially young men like me, don't have a thing to do in the day to pull their minds from the frustration of being poor, of being incapable of building a family, of getting respect from others. And so that temptation grows to grab and to break and to burn. These are the identities of the problem that remain lost in Tito Mbowene's tweets as well as in the ANC ideology, sort of hidden behind some story about how I look or how you look and what that tells you about how I think. So no, I don't think that we've come to terms with the fact that if you are an incredible government in the sense that you lack credibility and you make promises, eventually the reality comes to bear. And the reality is that our debt is so high, our electricity is so unreliable, our labor force is so unskilled, our population is so out of work, and our parliament is so distracted by efforts to take more of the less and less that there is and dish it out to themselves in the name of dishing it out to the people. That I think South Africa looks to have one of the worst COVID recoveries in the world after having had one of the worst performances in 2020. If you look at how young our population is, the number of deaths that we had were extreme, how far the virus spread, this possibility table that by scientists who identify the South African strain of the virus, that the reason it mutated here better than anywhere else is because it spread here better than anywhere else, even though we had the longest lockdown, one of the harshest lockdowns, particularly for business and also for civil liberties. We went in the worst way, we dealt with it in the worst way. If past performance is any kind of indication of future excellence or lack thereof, I think 2021 is going to continue to be a very, very difficult year in this country. And the grand shift, just to finish this point off, the ANC shifted. It must be recognized that the ANC was something, and it is no longer that. A second shift might be in play, where the ANC stops chasing voters on the basis of genuinely improving their lives, which it did by rolling out pipe water and electricity and extension services to so much of the country. It made people's lives better and therefore got votes. That was the old model. The new model seems to be more and more that as your life gets worse, we as the ANC will identify the problem as being some white monopoly capital apartheid ghost international conspiracy to make us look bad. And we alone can solve that problem, but only if we have all of your support by going after people and punishing them for not thinking like we think and not looking the way that they ought to look in this country. This is an old pattern. When things get worse, those kinds of politics for centuries have been very tempting, and they have had dire consequences. So I'm worried.
No, I think that's a very warning. You sure go, Marius?
I just want to make the point that the ANC is it's never been shy of talking about minorities and so on. I think it has reached a level that we haven't seen for a while. But if you go back and you read about the 1994 and 1990 elections, the ANC and even Nelson Mandela himself wasn't above, saying, don't vote for the white parties and what have you. So this isn't a new phenomenon, but I do think the issue is that because the ANC is doing so poorly now and making people's lives better, that's all they have. They didn't really have to rely on that in the past. They could say, look out the window, things have got better. But now, in the past 10 years, there's no doubt that since 1994, South Africa is a better place. But is it a better place since 2009? I don't know if you can still say yes anymore.
I think the answer is probably, these days, very definitely no. So, what is going to be done about this? Well, tonight is the State of the Nation address, being hosted by, of course, in Parliament and read out by our President, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is going to speak about the government's plans to solve these great crises and turn around the ship of state. Or at least that's the idea. So there's a number of issues here. We'll get onto the SONA content in a second. But one of the things that's being reported in the media a lot is due to COVID and the fact that this thing is going to be a sort of hybrid event. So that's a little bit online, a little bit offline. The opposition parties, I think the DA and possibly the EFF as well, I'm not sure about that, argued strongly that the thing should be entirely online, that basically Cyril should just read the speech in the chamber. But the ANC insisted, no, there has to be some people in the chamber. We're just not going to make it compulsory for MPs to attend. So there'll probably be quite a lot of cheering, clapping ANC MPs, but very few from the opposition benches. And as a result of this sort of scaled down one, the government has promised no thrills, they said. Instead of spending the budgeted 2.2 million rand on SONA, they're only going to spend 100,000. So, and a couple of things that are probably going to be mentioned in the speech, will or at least indications we'll get from the speech. There might be stuff about redistribution. There might be some vague hints about economic policy. He may mention expropriation without compensation. He may mention the status of SAA. This is an opportunity for him to do a lot of very good things to change the trajectory of the country. But I have my doubts. So let me go to you first, Marius. Firstly, any thoughts on the cost issue and any thoughts on the content of the speech?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's going to be anything too interesting. Most SONAs have been pretty vanilla affairs. They come with these grandiose promises. And it'd be interesting to go through the SONAs of the past 10 years or so and see how the promises made, if any of them actually, if there's anything that actually came out of it.
The pinnacle of them was definitely the smart cities thing.
Exactly.
After the show we did yesterday, France Cronier and me and Sarah were talking, and France was talking a lot about how the speech, all these things are laid out, but it's very much like sort of Hitler in the bunker in 1945, moving around soldiers on a map that don't exist. And that's very much, I think, how government's sort of policies and great initiatives are kind of feeling at the moment. It doesn't really matter what the president says in SONA because not much is going to change on the ground.
Exactly. But so apparently, like I say, there's not going to be many people in the chamber itself, but there's going to be a big kind of Zoom meeting for people who've been invited. But I just hope that the government keeps its passwords safe, because I remember initially in COVID, when there were a couple of government press conferences or seminars or whatever, hackers came and put stuff that was really appropriate for public forum onto. They took over the seminar and that. So let's hope that the government's IT guys are behind this kind of thing. And also I was reading that apparently the complex around Parliament has been closed down like it is normally during SONA. But that doesn't really make sense if there's only going to be 100 people attending, or even less, or whatever the case is going to be. It's not the normal pomp and ceremony. But hopefully this also means that we're not going to have SONA going into the future. We don't really need it. I mean, it seems to be a bit of a waste, especially in a country that's as financially stressed as we are at the moment. So let's hope this is a new kind of thing where we only spend 100,000 Rand on SONA instead of the 2 million or whatever it is. That can go, far better used in other places. So yeah, but I'm not expecting too much from the president. He's going to say usual kind of stuff, smile and nod and whatever and yeah, you might have some interesting things. Maybe there's one kind of glint of sunlight is that SA Express was sold yesterday, or apparently it's going to be sold for 50 million Rand. So maybe SA will be following suit, but it was sold for 50 million Rand when its liabilities are, I don't know, in the billions. So it's not going to make it. It's probably should have been sold years ago.
Gabriel, your thoughts? Yeah, I must say, as a patriot, I like a bit of pomp and ceremony, whether or not I like the ideology of the speaker.
Let me say that the question is, do you like 2.2 million rands of pomp and ceremony?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very small little drop in the bucket. I don't think that's the big issue. I think the big issue is that from reports that I've heard, the EFF will not be in physical attendance at all. I think that's probably useful. The SONA is an important event, whether you like it or not. There's a nice old story about critics, which I'll throw in here. If any of you learned Waiting for Godot at school, possibly the greatest play of the 20th century, an absurd play by Samuel Beckett. It's the first reviewer said, no, this is a terrible play, terrible play. Nothing happens twice. That is his idea of a grand diss. Now and he said, so this play is going to go nowhere. This play has been performed in every major cultural capital around the world for the last 50 years, and it will be for the next 100 as soon as theaters are allowed to run again. And in most brochures, that line sits on the back. Nothing happens twice. The point is, whether you mean something as a compliment or as a diss, when you honestly say what you think is going on, it's useful information. It's very useful to find out what the president thinks is going on, or what he thinks the public needs to hear. It might be damning. I think they have been damning in terms of promises made. And Cyril Ramaphosa's first SONA address, which is shortly after he was made president of the country by Parliament in 2018, before the national election, he promised that there would be expropriation without compensation. That is a promise which so far every effort has been made to deliver upon. That was bad news, but I'm bloody glad I heard it. So hearing what the president has to say is important because he is powerful. There's this long-running trope that Ramaphosa really has no power. He has all the power in the world to say exactly what he wants to say, knowing that everyone is going to hear it either firsthand or secondhand. And so what he chooses to say, when he chooses to say, our people need to get land, and it needs to be taken from those people. And Terra Lakota then asks, well, who are our people? I thought you just swore to protect all South Africans. That becomes a little earworm that resonates through the country for years, because it gives us a clue about what Ramaphosa is saying. I choose our people because that was not in the written text. That is something that Ramaphosa repeatedly put in himself and has now become a running trope in South African politics, for those who like it and for those who loathe it. So yes, those little grace notes, those impromptu bits, as well as the written speech, are very important to attend to. My prediction is that the president is going to blame everything on COVID. That which is not blamed on COVID will be blamed on apartheid. We now have 2 scapegoats in this country, so our flock is growing. And every promise will be made for the youth to get more jobs, for the grown-ups to get more money, for everyone to get more goodies straight out of the state, coffers, through private-public partnership. There'll be a lot of bragging about the vaccine, blaming the foot-dragging, incompetent treatment around it on misfortune and so on. On which note, just to reiterate, AstraZeneca's performance to the South African strain is strictly speaking news as of the moment that AstraZeneca releases its own clinical trial reports. But it's not really news. Since late December, early January, it was pretty clear what the South African strain was doing. And given AstraZeneca's already relatively low efficacy, what it would be doing to that. As well as, its ongoing ability to stop death. So the fact that it's sitting on hold, it shouldn't be. Good for Johnson & Johnson. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about that. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, as you say, Ramaphosa comes out and says, gosh, we had the lowest business confidence since 1985. And I realized that, when Mandela and Mbeki and Trevor Manuel and company were sitting in a situation like this, they actually, whether they still believed in the revolution or not, they stopped pushing for it. And they started pushing for real reform. They started really changing things in hard numbers, in concrete ways, spending less than they're taxing. They actually did it. And we're going to do that again. And, maybe in 30 years, if the ANC is still in power, then we'll get back to socially engineering whatever Robert Sobukwe's dream was. But in the meantime, we're going to put food on the table by protecting your property and not trying to sort of get between you and your lunch. Maybe he says that. That would be very interesting. That would be worth 2 million rand times.
It would be very good.
Times itself.
If it costs 2 million rand to get that, then I'm all on board. But yeah, that's long odds. Anyway,
unless we heard that hell was freezing over this morning, then I don't think we're going to hear that tonight.
Indeed. And I'm sure everyone's going to hear a lot about SONA. You may even have watched it by the time you watch this video. So we'll see what comes of it. There's sure to be at least some interesting things in there to talk about. Anyway, let us conclude with our last story of today. And this is a story that's not being that widely reported in the media, but the DA released a statement on it because I think they asked some parliamentary questions on it. And this is relating to the case of a farmer called Ivan Kluti, who is a guy from the Western Cape. Because he's colored, he received allocation of land to develop emerging farmers in 2012. And he farmed that land for about 6 years. And he was placed there with a guy who he didn't really get on with, but he was pretty happy to be there because he wanted to be a farmer with his own piece of land for a long time. Of course, he didn't have title, and he was only on the farm as per the government, the Department of Rural Development's whims. So after 6 years, they decided to move him again. So his farm was north of Paarl, and then they moved him to another farm in the Western Cape. They kept him there for a few years. But unfortunately, that piece of land was being disputed, and Ivan alleges that he was assaulted by the person who is disputing the ownership of the land several times. This is a former farm dweller who claimed that the land was hers. Anyway, after this continued for a while, he was moved again to another farm. And he farmed that from 2019 until now through COVID. And as of the 4th of February, he received a letter along with a delegation from the Department of Rural Development again, who said, sorry, but we're evicting you again. Tough luck. We're giving this farm allegedly to an MK vet. And he's now fairly distraught because he's lost his farm and his home again for the third time, and government has basically just messed him around. So I think for us, this is a really important story because, of course, this is what everyone will live under EWC. Gabriel, what struck you about this story?
It's a horror. It's a horror show. I think the most important takeaway is this. Everyone that's been listening to the show, paying attention to the news, will have been refreshed on the grand idea of a short, which means betting that things are going to get worse. Usually a short is you bet that a share price is going to go down. If it does go down, you make money. If for whatever reason it goes up, you lose a lot of money. Now, there are political shorts. You can bet against peace. You can bet against growth. And this is the second shift that I was talking about in the ANC's sort of political mindset. What this case demonstrates is bureaucrats deliberately getting in the way of a success story in land reform. And the thing you've got to ask yourself is, what is in it for them? And the answer, it's just so obviously mad that the successful farmer is being driven from his business and from his home repeatedly over and again, and excuses are being made. Who benefits? And the argument that I'm starting to worry about is that the guys in charge are so set up so that they benefit from the erosion of growth, peace, and prosperity. I also had a similar experience in Mpumalanga, where the police watched a labor dispute devolve. They sat by as people, 250 sort of blockaded a road for a week, burning tires, rocks, stoning people trying to get into work. The police kept getting called. The police don't come to work. And finally, what happens? The security try and help someone who's being stoned to death. The security then gets stoned. They turn and fire rubber bullets or maybe live ammunition and strike someone dead. And then you have a political moment where people can gather up and have a funeral and sing "Long live the ANC, long live." There's a political benefit coming out of this erosion of peace and prosperity. Similar story happened elsewhere in Mpumalanga involving poachers. Similar events have happened in KZN. Similar events to Ivan Klutter, successful farmer then getting chased off his land, have also been reported in KZN and in Limpopo. So there's a lot of cases. They sort of still, I don't know how many data points you want to have before you start detecting a pattern. This all lies in the sort of foreground of latest events. We all know the background. It just seems to me like the political equation is starting to change from we're going to bet that if we can make lives better, if we can make it safer, if we can make everything, more fair and just, then people are going to reward us for that, to if we can just make things a little bit worse, people will be a little bit more afraid, a little bit more bunkered down, a little bit more revanchist. And then we can take that energy and say, only we have the solution to punish the other. This is a grand worry highlighted by Ivan Klutter's case, and we'll be following that very closely going forward.
Indeed. Any closing remarks, Marius, in the last 30 seconds or so?
No, but just it shows you government's got no real interest in real land reform. These are the kind of people that could be giving title to and showing this is why we need land reform. But they're not. These people are getting pushed from pillar to post, and Ivan Klutter is definitely not an isolated incident. Right. Anybody who follows the news of this kind of issue can probably name at least 5 to 10 people at the top of their head that they know have been, treated very poorly by the government.
Most famously, David Roodt, of course.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes, very concerning indeed, and a dark warning of a future under EWC. Anyway, that is all the time we have for the show today. We will be back next week on Monday with the Daily Friend Show. Please support the IRR. Go to our website, read our stuff, click the Join Us button. Please support the Daily Friend, dailyfriend.co.za. Read our news and opinion pieces, including a piece Gabriel's just written on that sawmill in Mpumalanga and the labor dispute there. It's a really good article. I recommend it highly. You can go check that on dailyfriend.co.za. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Have a good week and weekend, everyone, and we shall see you next week for more news and analysis.